So I was driving across an open prairie, mind wandering a little bit, when I turned the radio to NPR at the precise moment that they were airing an interview about a new book. The author had abandoned her New York City lifestyle and her job at a glossy magazine to move to a farm in upstate somewhere and make a life on the land. She had married a hardworking farmer, and her book was about the joys of farm life. The story hit me like a punch in the gut. Like her, I am also a journalist by trade. And as it so happened, I had just received a phone call that very morning from my literary agent. The book proposal that I had spent months and months laboring over was dead. My story was about the year I decided to stop traveling, set down roots, be fully present here on my farm in western Colorado. My agent had pitched it to dozens of publishers, and it had received exactly 0 offers. Here's what they said. Christie Aschwanden has a beautiful voice. She is such a talented writer. This is a lovely story, but no one will buy this book. It was the literary equivalent of, it's not you, it's me. And now I was hearing on national public radio that the beloved who'd spurned me had fallen inexplicably in love with someone else. I know, it wasn't my book, but it sort of was my book. And I couldn't help myself. I hated her. I could think of a million reasons why she didn't deserve the book deal that she had and I didn't. She probably spends all her time in the city, I thought. She's probably never shoveled out a chicken house or butchered a turkey. She's probably one of those rich people who says she grows her own heirloom tomatoes, but really, she hires laborers to weed and pick her garden. Yeah, I thought all these things, but I didn't really believe any of them. The truth was, I didn't hate her. I envied her. Envy. It's such an uncomfortable emotion. It's the one feeling that has no recognizable facial expression, probably because we go to such great lengths to disguise it. Envy reveals our true heart's desires, and sometimes the things we want are unflattering. The author Cheryl Strayed once wrote in her Dear Sugar advice column that envy reveals we are all savages inside. We want to be the beloved, the chosen, the esteemed. Envy reveals our narcissism, our neediness. We're embarrassed by these thoughts, so our impulse is to cover them up. We loathe ourselves, but focus our disgust on the other. Now, I didn't want this author's life. I didn't want her book. What I wanted was to be acknowledged. I wanted to matter. I wanted my ideas to be heard. Instead, it was her voice telling her truths on my tinny car stereo. No, I didn't envy her. I didn't even know her. That's another thing about envy. It's not about the other. It's about us. And it clouds our view of the other. I learned this lesson in a poem, or should I say, a poet. Imagine a woman whose voice is like music, whose mere presence in a room emanates joy, whose tall, slender body radiates beauty. This poet's name is Rosemary Watala Traumer, and I have admired her from the moment a friend made our introduction by email. Rosemary had invited me to speak at a writing workshop, and in advance of the class, I read her bio. She was a poet laureate. She sang in an a cappella choir. She gave speeches and read poems at important events, and she writes a poem every single day. I will be the first to admit that I envied her, but my envy was aspirational. I thought it was a crazy idea, but I thought if I could just spend a few hours in the same room with her, maybe just a little bit of her brilliance would rub off on me. I walked into the classroom that afternoon, and she greeted me with a smile, grabbed my hand, and bowed down a little bit. "Oh, Christie Aschwanden, it's so nice to meet you. I wrote a poem about you." Say what? I was mortified. I had no idea what she was talking about, and before I could ask her, she was reciting the poem from memory. She began with the title. After having my manuscript rejected by Ghost Road Press, I read the bio of Christie Aschwanden, national award-winning writer and phenomenal Nordic skier. I cringed as she went on to describe her envy for this perfect creature whose only resemblance to me was the name. I'd never met Rosemary before, and here she was holding me up on a pedestal, declaring me the winner of some contest I'd never entered and did not deserve to win. The person in her poem was a plastic version of me. My true self, with all its quirks and imperfections, felt invisible, fraudulent. Sure, a tiny part of me felt flattered, but more than anything, I felt vulnerable. I know what it's like to envy someone like that. Your impulse is to tear them down, make things even. It crushed me to think she might feel that way about me. I didn't want to be her superior. I wanted to be her friend. Of course, I couldn't say any of this at the time. I was too mortified. So I just sort of graciously backed away. And on my way home that evening, I kept thinking about the poem, turning it over and over in my head. Eventually, it hit me. She never meant the poem to be about me. That's why she could write it without ever meeting me. She was actually just expressing her own vulnerabilities. And by doing so openly, she was actually inviting me in, offering me the kind of friendship that I'd hoped for with her. So when I got home, I decided to turn it around. I wrote an imitation of her poem in which she was the envied one. I emailed it to her, and that poem marked the beginning of one of my most cherished friendships. It also got me thinking about envy. Why was it that my envy for Rosemary could feel so uplifting and helpful, whereas my feelings for that author on the radio felt so toxic and unhelpful? I dug into the research, and it turns out that scientists have found envy in every single human culture they've looked for it. They've even seen it in dogs. I've seen it in my dogs. And the thing is, it comes in two main varieties. The first is malicious envy. That's what I felt for the writer on the radio. I couldn't help comparing myself to her, and in my secret calculation, she came out ahead. Her success rubbed my failure in my face. And the other thing was, I couldn't see any obvious reason why she had a book deal and I didn't. That's a hallmark of malicious envy. There's some sort of twinge of perceived injustice. That other person is so like you, but better, and that makes you feel worse. It's such a contrast to the kind of envy I feel with Rosemary. Researchers call this benign envy, and it has admiration at its heart. Sure, the other person has something you want, but you don't resent her for it. Instead, it serves as evidence that good tidings might someday befall you too. If Rosemary can succeed, maybe I can too. I love what the writer Anne Friedman says about this. She calls it the shine theory. Surrounding yourself by the best people doesn't make you look worse by comparison, she said. It makes you better. You shine, I shine. That's how I feel about my friends, Rosemary most of all. So, benign envy can lift you up. But what if you're feeling malicious envy? It's not really a feeling you want to embrace, right? It's really difficult to eradicate. In fact, the 18th century writer Samuel Johnson called envy the mind's stubborn weed. But I prefer to think of it as a dandelion. We're primed to think of it as a noxious invader, but if you can just open your mind a little bit, it can show you something beautiful. I learned this through experience. So, about the time that my book was being rejected by all those publishers, a friend of mine landed an enormous deal for her memoir. I was happy for her. Truly, I was. And yet, I caught myself finding fault. Really, it was just the topic of her book that had landed all that money. It was a really personal topic. Should she really be sharing that in public? When I caught myself thinking these terrible, horrible thoughts, I cringed. That's not me. And that's the thing about envy. It's not about the other, it's about you. Thinking about my friend's deal had distracted me from what I really wanted. She had a book deal. I didn't. And so I took a deep breath and made myself say it out loud. I'm just envious. And then I embarked on step one of what I've come to think of as the envy eradication formula. Acknowledge it's not about her, it's about you. You'll tell yourself it isn't, but really, it is. I told myself, oh, I'm just looking out for my friend, I don't want her to get hurt. But that was just a cover, something to make myself feel righteous instead of mean. The truth was, this wasn't about her, it was about me. I felt inadequate. She was chosen, I was not. So I made myself say it out loud, and that felt so clarifying. It actually gave me a sense of relief. The thing is, so much of our angst about envy comes from our impulse to disguise it. Pretending I wasn't envious turned me into a monster. Acknowledging it made me human. And that allowed me to move to step two of the envy eradication formula. I'll let go of the comparisons. Look, life isn't fair. Other people are going to have talents and unearned advantages that you don't have. There's nothing you can do about that. But what you can do is focus on your own talents and strengths. No one can be a better you than you can. And with that in mind, you can move to step three. Ask yourself, what is it exactly that this other person has that I would like? Envy is really just your true desires bubbling up to the surface. To really understand them, you may need to look a little deep. In my case, the easy answer was that she had this big book deal and a nice publisher, but I didn't really care about the money or even the book. What I really wanted were the things that those things got for her. Support for her project, a way to get her voice heard. By fixating on her book deal, I was distracting myself from the things I really wanted. Support for my own project, a way to have my voice heard. And the thing is, a book is only one means towards these ends. Once I had finished looking at this, sort of really unfolding my envy, examining how I was really feeling, I realized that my envy for my friend had completely disappeared. I no longer felt that malicious envy toward her. I felt gratitude. She had helped me understand something important about myself so that I could find my own best path. I ended up writing a magazine article about my project, and then another and another. The essay that I'd intended as the finish to my book ended up getting printed in a beautiful magazine and reprinted in a book of essays. I was invited on an NPR show to talk about my project. I never did write that book, but I got what I really wanted. My voice heard, people engaging with my ideas. It was such an enlightening experience that, well, of course I wanted to write about it. So I pitched a story to an editor at one of my favorite magazines. I wrote the story, and a few days after I got the final edits, I found myself unexpectedly on a plane with my friend, she of the enormous book deal. Yeah, that story I just told you about how I'd envied her, I put it in the story. Yeah, I changed her name and the identifying details, but I knew she would identify herself the moment she read the story. I hadn't intended it to be a secret. I'd called her, really I had. She just hadn't called back, and I just sort of let it slide, hoping she wouldn't see the story that was running in a magazine that she loved. And now here she was in the same waiting room with me in the airport, and I felt so torn. I knew I should tell her about the story, but it felt like getting naked and forcing her to look at my ugliest scars. I hadn't forgotten how painful it was for me to hear Rosemary recite her poem, and I wasn't sure that our friendship could withstand that kind of honesty. What should I do? I agonized and agonized. Finally, I got on the plane, took my seat a few rows from her, and I got out my reporter's notebook. I made a list. Tell her, don't tell her. Under tell her, I wrote honesty, authenticity. She might feel flattered. She will find out anyway. Under don't tell her, I wrote tension, There's not time to discuss now. It was a short flight. She might take it as a diss. It could make her feel bad. That last one really worried me. I thought about it until I just couldn't stand it anymore. I got up, took my laptop over to her seat, and handed it to her. I wrote something I need to tell you about, but just know it's not about you, it's about me. The look of horror on her face, I instantly regretted my decision, but what could I do? I went back to my seat for 30 of the most agonizing minutes of my life. Eventually, she came back to my seat, handed me the story, and said something I've since forgotten. The plane landed, and I felt sick to my stomach. Ugh. She got off the plane before me, and when I got off, there she was waiting for me. We had only an hour before our next flights, but it was enough. As we walked over to the airport bar, she told me that her publishing experience wasn't as perfect as it might seem. It's a lot of pressure to land a big advance like that, and she was writing about a difficult topic. She had published such a beautiful book, but the path to get there was more difficult than I might know. She turned and said that she had actually envied me too. In fact, she'd always wanted to write for the magazine where my story was appearing. We had a laugh over that. She bought me a beer, and then we went our separate ways as friends. Thank you.